Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey everybody, welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host Brian Slagel. I'm the CEO of Metal Blade Records, home to many metal bands over the years, including 3 albums by the band we're going to talk about today, the Alice Cooper Band. We did 3 records of theirs. Well, not the original Alice Cooper Band, we only did Muscle of Love, but we did 3 Alice Cooper records back in the early 90s and reissued them, which I was very proud to be able to do. But today we're going to talk about a song that I think is one of the heaviest songs of all time. Yeah, that's a big word. It's a big sentence, but trust me, it is, and hugely influential. Halo of Flies. Came out in 1971. I argue that some of the stuff on this song is just as heavy as Black Sabbath was back then in the same time frame. So hugely influential. They still play it today. Alice still plays it today live, which is awesome. So super cool. And I'm really happy to bring in the man who played bass on that record, also co-wrote the song, Dennis Dunaway, which is amazing. So we're going to talk to him. Also, our good friend Jay Ruston. We'll talk about the production. And we begin it all with our friend from the north, Mr. Martin Popoff.
All right, nice choice, Brian. Halo of Flies, Alice Cooper from Killer, from the second Alice Cooper album of the Enlightened period, and 4th overall. This is produced by Bob Ezrin, issued November 27th, 1971. So this song is 8 minutes and 22 seconds long. The idea here with Halo of Flies is Alice Cooper wanted to prove, apparently, according to a quote, that they wanted to prove that they could write King Crimson-like sweet songs. Not that King Crimson writes songs that sound anything like this whatsoever. But yeah, so this is an interesting tune that has cool use of synthesizers, pretty pioneering. It's got some great bass, ensemble sort of integrated bass parts from Dennis Dunaway. I really like that about it. It's got just neat playing, period. But yeah, it's got a bunch of parts that kind of don't recur. What we get is this long sort of build up to a memorable sort of verse section where Alice is singing unison with the riff. It's kind of sing-songy. It's a creepy song altogether, but this part is particularly creepy and sing-songy.
Daggers and contacts and bright shiny limos. I gotta watch that turns into a lifeboat. Glimmering nightgowns, poisonous as cobras. Silence are under the heel of my shoe.
There's kind of like little Egypto mysterious sort of melodies kind of all throughout the thing. What a lot of people remember, of course, is the heavy up-tempo part where Alice has got a really snarling vocal on him. There's a long bolero section kind of at the end and there's a modulation in there also, and again you've got some sort of interesting Egypto sort of sounds, Middle Eastern sounds in here, which kind of goes with the whole bolero thing. But yeah, the last 5 minutes of the song are all instrumental. After Alice says, "You will never understand," and that's it. That's the last we hear from Alice, and we kind of cruise through these parts. I suppose it's a little bit of a precursor to Merciful Fate's Satan's Fall, where it's just a new thing followed by a new thing, followed by a new thing. Yeah, we never get back to that verse section at the end. It just turns into this big, long sort of jam. You know, Bob Ezrin's production on this album is workmanlike. I don't think it's particularly hugely dynamic. You don't get a lot of different sounds in here other than, you get a little bit of guitar effect and a little bit of synth stuff. But essentially, it's a solid kind of not particularly effects-laden production for 1971. So we're talking late 71. Like I say, Bob Ezrin, I don't think ever got the greatest sounds out of Alice Cooper. This is not a particularly complicated song when it comes to ear candy. It's just complicated with all the parts they put together. It's not particularly proggy. Everything's kind of 4/4 in it, right? But yeah, it is definitely a sweet song that is, unconventional layering of parts. Everybody loves that creepy title to it, right, as well, Halo of Flies. This is one of, if you're a metal fan, if you're a deep Alice Cooper fan, this is definitely one of the songs people really like from this album. It was never issued as a single, except I guess it was kind of a hit in Netherlands, and it eventually came out as a single a few months later, backed with Under My Wheels. But yeah, not a single song given its 822 width and girth. But yeah, great choice, Brian. Alice Cooper, Halo of Flies.
Thank you, Martin. One thing I love about this podcast is just getting everybody's different opinion. You get 4 different opinions on a song when you listen here. You get Martin's, you get whoever we talk to about the production, whoever we talk to about the actual song itself, and of course myself included. You make some interesting points in there. I love the fact that you mentioned the Merciful Fate, Satan's Fall thing, and also a precursor also to Iron Maiden, because you've got some of these Iron Maiden songs where Bruce vanishes for a long period of time. Sometimes he'll come back at the end a lot of times, but he vanishes here too. So precursor to that, which the only thing I'll disagree with Martin about is, well, production is great. We'll talk about that in a minute with our buddy Jay Ruston, but also the fact that it's not proggy. I might argue that it's pretty proggy, especially for like 1971. Not King Crimson proggy enough, but still pretty proggy. But as always, love Martin. He's got a great insight. He's written over 150 books about hard rock and heavy metal, so he knows his stuff. So we appreciate him coming in and talking about it.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
Once again, we bring in our good friend Jay Ruston, producer of, so many bands: Amon Amarth, Avatar, Stone Sour, Corey Taylor. I mean, we could sit here for the next hour. Coheed and Cambria. So if you want to look up his Wikipedia, and it'll all be there anyway. How are you, Jay?
I wish I had a Wikipedia. I actually don't.
You don't really?
It's impossible to. Yeah, you can't make your own, and nobody's made one. So there you go.
Well,
I know.
I'm sure there's a list somewhere.
There's a discography somewhere.
Discogs.
Exactly. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be back.
Always good to have you. And you, of course, have a connection to, we've talked about Alice Cooper before and the whole Bob Ezrin thing. And we're talking again about Alice Cooper, the great song Halo of Flies, my favorite Alice Cooper song.
Wow.
This is not a ranking show. It's just 100 songs. But this would for certain be in my top 20 all-time favorite heavy metal songs.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I mean, Bob Ezrin, of course, and it's funny. This is not an Alice Cooper song that I would go to a lot. Of course, I know it, but as a kid learning how to play bass and playing a lot of Alice Cooper songs, I was more attracted to Billion Dollar Babies, Under My Wheels, songs we've talked about. But the thing that blows my mind about this song, first of all, is the sheer length of it and how progressive it is. And I'm sure, knowing Bob Ezrin and his level of perfection, which he got from Jack Richardson, my old mentor, is they most likely cut this song in sections and then cut the tape together, because the middle section is just wild. And the drum sound, it's got this very typical Ezrin, Alice Cooper, dry, thuddy kind of drum sound, which I love. But then you get to the middle and there's like this fantastic room. And I've never been able to figure out, and I want to maybe even ask Garth Richardson, like, is he, as a kid was around a lot of this. Were they using chambers? Were they in a big room and just chose not to use the room mics except for special effects?
No, it's actually, so I was able to talk to Dennis Dunaway, which is why we're doing this now, because you get that opportunity and you take it, because it's like a, legendary guy. And I wanted to talk to him about this song. And I've interviewed him already, even though as the podcast goes, you'll hear him afterwards, but he was talking about that. And he tells the story. They were recording in like a kind of a more or less a bathroom type thing. So wherever the studio was, but it's kind of funny. He just said that they did some drums in there and it was pretty easy. But I did think he did mention that they cut it in segments because there's 3 different parts of it. I was always interested because, Ezrin kind of was the hit song guy, and that's why they brought him in, because, we don't have a hit song. We need a hit song. Ezrin came in, and obviously the two worked together perfectly. But I love that he still allowed them to do these big, long, Halo Flies, Black Juju, a bunch of these long songs. But I picked this one because, to me, this is probably the heaviest, if you peel back the layers, of any Alice Cooper song. And when it came out, I would argue that it rivals the heaviness of even Black Sabbath.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's funny you say that he allowed them, because pretty much every record I do, at least with metal or hard rock bands, there's a song that the band is really into and is like their favorite. And it oftentimes is like the weakest song on the record or the most inaccessible. Still great, but inaccessible, say, to like record company people or radio people or whatever. So the way I work with something like that is like, yes, you absolutely get your way with this song. We'll do exactly what you want, but I get my way on these 2 songs because they're hits. So let me make them hits and let me get you on the radio, which, I've been pretty good at. So it's like, I actually really enjoy those songs because I get to watch them be totally creative and not care about any rules or anything. And that's what this song feels like.
Yeah, 100%. They've always been, I was talking to Dennis about this too. And everybody knows that they were, to me, they're criminally underrated as players.
Yes.
Especially that him and Neil Smith as a rhythm section were phenomenal.
Yes.
And they don't get the credit, and even the songs, because, they had big hit songs, and of course the show and the image, and that all takes precedence, which I get. But I've always argued over the years that, that the original Alice Cooper band, every one of those guys were phenomenal players.
Especially this early on before like drugs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Glenn Buxton he's one of the, I think it was Rolling Stone's 100 best rock guitar players. He's in that list as he should be. And he was still,
no doubt.
He was still together when they were making this record. But it's just so heavy. Like when I listen to it, I mean, there's a lot of the production that Ezrin does that takes away a little bit of the heaviness. It's not like right up in your face like Sabbath was.
Yeah, the drums don't punch like I'd like them to, and which is funny because there's other songs on this record where they do. So I don't know, maybe it's just because there's so many layers or something. And look, the technology was, as you know, was so limited. The band had to absolutely kick ass to make a song like this, and it just speaks volumes to their ability, because even to record this song now would be a challenge enough for a band to play great and make sound exciting in the studio. And that's the thing. It's like when you see a band live and it sounds so exciting, most of that is volume, sheer volume. And to make it sound exciting on record is very difficult, and especially when it's 9 minutes long.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about this song that they don't get enough credit for. It's just one of the original progressive bands, really. I mean, you could obviously go back to, Yes and some other stuff that's super progressive. But again, this original Alice Cooper had a lot of these longer, epic, big songs that I love, that I know influenced everybody that you talk to are big Alice Cooper fans, and they're always fans of the original Cooper band, those first few records they did up until Muscle of Love. I mean, those things are all classic, and there's not a metal musician in the world that hasn't gone back and listened to that and taken something from a lot of it, especially when you were younger. I mean, I think now it's a little less because there's so many other things out there you can listen to, but certainly in the early days, this is like, I mean, just to me as a kid, when I was getting into it, was just mind blowing.
I agree. And I actually am very grateful that I grew up so close to Detroit, because they gave him so much radio love. And it wasn't just the singles, 11 PM on a Saturday night, you would hear this on WRIF. as a teenager, especially, when I wasn't out drinking yet or doing anything like that, my weekends were like sitting in my room with headphones, listening to the radio, just devouring music. And it's just astonishing to me that something like this would be on the radio, but it was. That's not going to happen now.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. We talk about this when we go back to, so many of these records were made in the early 70s, way before the technology and everything was there. That's always the fascinating thing to me, is it's all real instruments and, real cabinets and the whole thing, which is awesome. But it always amazes me to how still to this day, at least to me, I think these records sound so good when it wasn't that easy. And there are a lot of records that came out in the 70s that were really great but didn't sound amazing, but this one does.
There's a reason that we're still using all this gear. We've got the Sound City Neve at Dave Grohl's place. I've got a Trident that this computer's sitting on top of. My friend just bought a used, like mid-60s Elam 251 microphone for like $25,000. The things they used that they paid a few $100s for back then, old German mics and old consoles, was the best they had at the time. We're still using it because it still sounds great. Because once it gets in the computer, it might as well just stay there and we can do our thing with all the fancy plugins and everything, that part of technology is fantastic. There's so much great stuff out there right now. But it still needs to go through all that stuff first, in my opinion. And that technology hasn't changed at all. Everybody's trying to mimic it with all this new gear. You've got all these new companies like Warm Audio who do a fantastic job of making the microphones, the preamps, the EQs, and all we're doing is copying everything that Bob Ezrin used. So it's like, it doesn't surprise me that it still sounds great. And tape machines. Universal Audio just came out with a Studer, not just came out, but they literally have a Studer 24 track in the computer. You put your tracks through it. It sounds great. So we're still trying to capture that same thing.
Yeah, it's just so organic too. I think that's the one thing that I've always loved about all that stuff, is it's super organic. And again, these guys had to play these songs like they were. And we talked before, the mixing, everybody's got to man the faders, and there's no getting around it. You could cut tape, and people cut tape back then too to kind of piece things together, but not nearly as much as you can do now, or even in the 90s when that got to be a big thing, when, but the Black Album, of course, famously, Lars, like almost every piece of a lot of his drums were all cut together.
Every bar,
I was at the studio once because they were recording in North Hollywood on that record. So I was up there a lot, and it was right next door. I think I've told this story before, right next door to my favorite sushi restaurant at the time, but I was in there a lot. They had, I think there were either 4 or 5 guys whose job was just cutting tape. So it's pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, if you watch the making of, just seeing them cut tape, and it's like, I used to cut tape all the time, and it didn't always work out so great, but I would just tape all my drum fills up on the wall, and I'd have them all numbered and which one was which, and that's the best we could do at the time. But you just hope that the band could play. And if they couldn't, Bob Ezrin was very famous for just replacing musicians. So you just sort of either had to play or you got replaced.
Yeah, well, that's why these first couple Alice Cooper records are probably my favorite, because it's the original band. It's before, all the drugs and alcohol and everything got in. And then, other guys ended up coming in and playing certain parts. But these first 2 records, this was those guys.
Absolutely. And look, there's something to be said about the gel of them together. And to me, that rhythm section, it has the same feel and vibe as like early Thin Lizzy as well. It's just like the way that rhythm section gelled, and the guitar harmonies, I love it. It's so good. And the middle section of this is just so cool. It's like, it takes you by surprise. And I remember listening to it with headphones on as a kid, just being, blown away.
Yeah, it's so good. And the riffs too are just so heavy. I'd love to hear like a Rhino Records, who we love, because they do so many amazing reissues. And they did an amazing reissue of this album, by the way, with this, I don't know where they found it, because we were back working with Warner Brothers in the early 90s, and we released 3 Alice Cooper records, and I was allowed to go through the vaults. I think we talked about this before, where I found these 2 shows from 73, and I went in the studio and mixed them, and they sounded amazing, but the band didn't want to use them at the time. They've since come out now, which is good. But I was a huge Alice Cooper collector. Between myself and the late, great Brian Nelson, who was Alice's assistant for many, many, many years, who was an even bigger Alice Cooper collector than I was. Like, we knew where everything was, where every single show was recorded. We knew what existed. But out of nowhere, they found these two shows. They used one on Schools Out and one on Killers from Puerto Rico, I think it is. And they're incredible. The sound quality is phenomenal. The playing is incredible. They're insane. So I asked Toby Mamis, who's Alice Cooper's manager, day-to-day manager. I said, hey, where did you guys find this stuff? I didn't know this even existed. He goes, oh, I'm glad you liked it. But I don't even think he really knew where it came from. But
I wonder if it was one of those like radio show things, like, in Toronto, El Macombo would record every show. And they used to have a Friday night show where every band that played in Toronto, even at the big arena, their show would get recorded and it would get played on the radio and then never heard again. And that happened a lot there.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't that, because I've never heard of this venue or this place ever before, and even thinking that even people were playing there back in the early 70s. So
wow.
One of these days I should ask the Rhino people, like, where did you find these tapes? It doesn't really matter. I'm just curious because it's so good. But the version of Killers, the reissue that Rhino did, highly recommended, because it comes with that whole show from 72 or 71, I'm sorry. And it's so great. And of course, this song, even more raw on that one.
That I'd like to hear, actually.
It's great. It's great. The performance specifically, because there's two shows, and I said they used one for Killer and one for Schools Out. The Killer one, I think, is better than the other one. They're both great. But the Killer one I thought was a little bit better, because I guess they did 2 nights there, which is interesting as well. But Rhino did a reissue of Muscle of Love. There's not a lot of stuff available on Muscle of Love. So what they did was they took like the raw demos of all the songs and put them on as a second disc. And it's great because it's like super raw and less production, and some of this stuff sounded really, really cool. So I would have loved to have heard a version of Halo of Flies that's just the super raw demo version of it. So
yeah, no kidding.
Nonetheless, it's an amazing song, and it sounds, as any Ezrin record does, sounds amazing.
Yeah, they all have a thing, and specifically his drum sound and his guitar sounds, I would say. But Dennis's bass sound was very consistent through all this. And it just has like this chunkiness to it that cuts right through. Everything had its special little place in the mix, which is the best thing about 70s rock and hard rock records. They all had such a space to them, which is really hard to do now because everything's just so like brick walled and in your face. And especially bass guitar, I find, has been kind of left in the dust by metal. Everybody's got these like just gargantuan guitar sounds, which is great, but like, I'm a bass guy, it's like I want to hear bass. Maybe it's because I love Iron Maiden and Rush and Sabbath, but like it's such an important part. And Alice Cooper records, I think, do a great job of showcasing that. And that's Bob and Jack, of course.
Agreed, 100%. Well, thank you again, sir, for doing this. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brian.
This episode is brought to you by Credit Karma. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve, helping you monitor your progress and giving you personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals. Make sure you're on the right track, no matter where you are on your financial journey. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download today.
It's football season, and you can now get almost anything you need for game day delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a running back delivered, but you can get baby back ribs delivered. A strong defense? No. A strong deodorant? Yes. A 6-pack of abs? Nope. 6-pack of beer? Yes. Get almost anything for game day delivered with Uber Eats, official on-demand food delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol 21 plus and in select cities. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Across the ocean, where no one could see, and I put a time bomb in your submarine. Goodbye to old friends, the secrets in hand. With phone papers and counterfeit plans.
It is now my honor to welcome in a man who played bass on this song and all of the early Alice Cooper band songs. He wrote the definitive biography on the Alice Cooper Band, too. It's an amazing book, amazing read. He co-wrote this song as well. He's also back in with Alice Cooper's band again, and he is a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. A legend is an understatement. Mr. Dennis Dunaway, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Brian.
This song, to me, is one of the most influential songs of metal rock of all time. Talking about Halo of Flies, because it came out in 1971, and I've made this argument many years with many different people talking about rock and metal and everything. This song rivals Black Sabbath in terms of the heaviness for the time that it came out. What were you guys thinking when you're making this album, and specifically this song?
The Killer album was the first album that we walked into the studio knowing that people would be listening, because I'm 18 had become a hit. But at that point, we still had so many negative reviews and everything. People were saying that we used theatrics as a crutch to hide the fact that we couldn't play. And we decided, well, we're going to write a song to put an end to that. And Halo of Flies is the song.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And I always found it interesting. You know, the first couple records were very progressive and very out there and all sorts of different stuff going on. And then obviously Bob Ezrin comes in, kind of hones everything in for what you guys were doing. But what really made me interested is, you know, you guys were writing long songs way before long songs were popular to write, and a lot of progressive stuff too. I mean, this song is kind of all over the place. What were the influences that got you to kind of write in that direction?
It had to do with a band collaborating, and we just had tons of ideas coming from all different directions. And we had a tendency to try to fit every idea into every song. And, you know, then Bob Ezrin comes along, and we knew we needed somebody that could get a hit single on the radio for us, because we had a reputation. We had everything it took except the hit single. And back then, all of the promoters were so hit single driven that you couldn't make any money or get hired unless you had something on the radio. So we brought Bob Ezrin in, and he took this song. He thought it was called I'm Edgy, just because we weren't happy the night that he saw us play in New York City, because the dressing room wasn't available, and it was just a lot of pent-up anger in the band when we performed, and we were angry when we performed that night. So he thought it was called I'm Edgy, and it was I'm 18. We broke the news when he showed up at our farm in Pontiac, Michigan to start working. But the first song he did was I'm Edgy, I'm 18. And he said, okay, first we got to get rid of this whole sprawling intro, you know, and we're all like, but we like the intro, you know. And then we're going to just start with the chorus instrumentally, and we're going to get right to it. And then we're going to cut out this whole giant middle section. And so he immediately taught us how to make a song AM friendly. Because back then, the long songs would get played on FM radio, but not on AM, unless you were the Beatles, maybe with Hey Jude. But there were a few songs, long songs, that made it onto AM radio at the time. But generally, bands had to be like 3 minutes, maybe 3.5 minutes was pushing it. So Bob did that, and right on the spot, we found out, hey, you know, okay, so this is how you do it, right? Back in Pretty's For You days, we were like the mothers of invention. We weren't necessarily interested in writing a commercial hit, you know, but that didn't put food on the table. And we figured, well, if nobody listens to the album, they're not going to hear our artistic statement. So if we get a hit single, at least then they will buy the album and be able to hear our other artistic stuff that we wanted them to hear. So all of that kind of fell into place as we got somebody that cared. Frank Zappa cared, but they didn't have any money. So Pretty's For You was a major rush job. Easy Action, we got pulled into the studio way before we were ready and assigned David Briggs, who was from the Crazy Horse. He had just finished recording Crazy Horse for Neil Young. So he didn't like us. So there wasn't the chemistry. Then we get Bob Ezrin, and there's the chemistry. We all are on the same page. We all want to get theatrics into the grooves on the record.
Yeah, really a marriage made in heaven. It just obviously, as you mentioned, just completely changed the course of the band. But also, I thought that, here's Killer, which is the second record you've done with Bob, so you're more familiar with him, and getting in studio, I'm sure, was a lot different than it was on the first record. And you're making, what I found interesting is you're making the 3-minute, radio friendly songs, but then you've also got these incredible long epic songs like Halo of Flies. When you're in the studio making stuff like this, I always like to ask people who are making these legendary records, did you have a clue when you're making this record that you're doing something special, or it's just like, we're just making music?
We knew it was special. Well, we felt Pretty's for You was going to set the world on fire, but we felt really strong going into the studio on Love It to Death, but that would have been our third strike. So we didn't have the confidence. We thought, okay, well, this is it, boys, make or break. But because I'm 18 became a hit, now we walked in feeling very confident. That's one of the things that stands out about the Killer album. We walked in feeling we were doing a lot of gigs. We were playing a lot. Everybody was really tight, and we felt very confident about the songs. We had already had a couple of weeks of pre-production with Bob and whipped everything into shape. So, even though, we would think that we had the songs polished to perfection, when you get in the studio under that magnifying glass, all of a sudden these little tiny things stand out that you go, oh my God, we got to fix that. There's always work to be done once you get in the studio, but we felt pretty confident. Now, Halo of Flies, we wrote in Phoenix, Arizona. It was just the band in a warehouse that somebody allowed us to rehearse in. And we weren't living there at the time. We were just visiting our parents and coming through town. And we got this warehouse for like a couple of days. And we brought in this big standing chalkboard. I mean, the thing was like 6 feet wide. We would name all of the parts: galloping part, Arabian part. So every part in Halo of Flies, we gave a name. And then we would put the arrangement on this blackboard where we could all be standing right in front of it and see what's going on. And then if we got an idea to change the arrangement, we would erase it there and move it down here. And that's how that song was arranged. When we got in the studio, we recorded it exactly the way we wrote it. But we call it a drum solo, but the bass is going throughout it. When we got to that part, it was just bass, no drum solo. And then, I'm not sure if you can still hear this. It seems like at one point on one of the mixes, you could hear Michael Bruce counting, 1, 2. And when he got to 23 or something, then we went into the outro of the song, the rest of the song. So that's how we recorded it. So we had the whole song, but no drums in that section. It was just the bass. And then this Mid-Atlantic Studios in Chicago, that's where Love It to Death and Killer were recorded. Great studio, great sounding studio. But it was in a corporate building and upstairs. So we were there late at night. Now we disassemble Neil's drums, and like a bunch of ants, each of us are lugging drums downstairs to the lobby of this. And the night watchman is looking at us the way we're dressed, and we're all hustling drums into the men's room in the lobby. And the guy's like, what's going on here? We set up in there because it was a big men's tile bathroom and for the echo. And Neil was in there. And then we were upstairs listening to Neil, and he's saying, oh, this is great. I can drink beer while I record this. And if I need to take a leak, everything, it's right. I'm right here, So we recorded the drums in that bathroom. And then next thing you know, the night watchman is seeing us all come down and hustle all the drums back upstairs.
That's amazing. I love stories like that. So many things about the original Alice Cooper band, they're very underrated. I think a lot of people now, over the course of time, I think it's not quite that way. But, you and Neil as the rhythm section of the band, to me, were one of the best rhythm sections of all time in rock and roll. I mean, you guys fit together so well, and you're both incredible players. you don't get enough credit, I think, for that.
Well, it seems like I've been mentioned 1,000,000 times as an underrated bassist, And I'm thinking, if I have 1,000,000 of underrated, can I trade those in for a couple of rated? But that's okay. Let's face it. We brought spectacle to rock shows, and our shows, we upstaged ourselves with our shows when we wrote Is It My Body? So we thought, okay, Neil had a snake. Okay, we're going to incorporate the snake into the show, but let's write this song for that occasion. And we worked really hard writing Is It My Body? And we couldn't wait to play it on stage and see what they wrote about it, And so we performed it, and the next day we read all about the snake.
Always the case, right?
Yeah, so we were kind of our own worst enemy when it came to getting recognition for the music that we did.
Well, true, but now, you talk to any heavy metal band or hard rock band, and they all were massively influenced by the early Alice Cooper stuff. And so many bass players I know, too, were fascinated by the way you played. Guys like all the way back to Cliff Burton, Metallica, and Joey Vera from Arts, and on and on. You could talk to any of them. And a lot of them cited the way you played as the big influences how they ended up playing. I know, Steve Harris is a fan too. I mean, like I said, you can't find a heavy metal bass player that wasn't influenced by you.
Well, that's very flattering. We have our influences too. We just came before them. But, Paul Samuel Smith, talk about underrated, of the Yardbirds. Everybody talks about the 3 guitar players they don't talk about Chris Straja. He was the guitar player in the Yardbirds too, but Beck, Page, and Clapton, that's all you hear about when it comes to the Yardbirds. But Paul Samuel Smith on bass was equally as progressive as the guitar players. And he was my biggest influence. I mean, I learned by listening to Bill Wyman on record, drop the needle on the record and figure out what he was doing and all those blues patterns. And of course, Paul McCartney, even though I found Paul McCartney was a little bit more restrictive because his parts were designed specifically for each Beatles song, where what the Stones were doing, if you learn a bass pattern from what Bill Wyman was doing for one song, it kind of could be applied to other songs. And the same, and then when you got to the Yardbirds, those blues patterns were taken to a whole different progressive place. And when I heard that, we learned a few Yardbirds songs. We even opened for the Yardbirds on September 4th, 1966. That was an amazing show. But as far as me being influenced by Paul Samuel Smith, it wasn't so much me wanting to learn his parts after that sort of revelation of hearing what he could do with music, where all of a sudden the bass player sticking to the root note and a bluesy pattern, didn't necessarily apply. You could go anywhere you wanted. And so that I set my chickens free then and figured out that I could play. Hey, I have a lot of notes on this bass neck, I work with Joe Bouchard, and this is an exaggeration, but it's funny. Joe Bouchard played bass with Blue Oyster Cult, and these kids came up and asked Joe if he ever played a 5-string bass. And Joe said, I don't use all 4 of the ones I have. And there's something to be said for that. Bass holding down the bottom, that big giant sound. That's all fine and dandy. But I'm thinking, hey, I've got all of these notes up here. They're there for a reason. Why not use them? I don't use a 5-string bass. I just use every note on a 4-string bass.
And it works. That's the great thing. I think the musicianship of the early Alice Cooper band was everybody in the band was a phenomenal player. And you get that many good players together and it's just going to work. It's almost impossible not to work.
The things that don't work, we work on them until they do work. So that's how that goes. So the drummer before Neil, John Spear, who was our original drummer, he was powerful. When he hit the bass drum, you felt it in your chest, like Buddy Miles, But he didn't want to jam, and he didn't want to do all of the avant-garde style of music that we wanted to do on Pretty's For You. He wanted to write garage band hits because we had a hit in Arizona, number 11 on AM radio, the very first song Alice and I ever wrote, Don't Blow Your Mind. And that put food on the table. We had wads of money in our pockets at the time. And then we go to LA and we don't have any food. So he didn't want to jam. He would fold his arms while the rest of the band would be jamming. But we would go out in the desert. There was this place where Alice and I, when we were in cross country in high school, ran this meet that was out Thunderbird Park, way outside of Phoenix at the time in those days. And there were telephone poles, and the very final telephone pole had an electrical outlet on it, and a picnic table. So I said, hey, wait a minute, we can come out here and plug in a couple of amps. So John Spear didn't want to do that. So Neil said, yeah, I'll come. I'll bring a snare drum and a cymbal, let's jam. And we would do these long, extensive, just totally improvised jams. And it would echo between the mountains, and it was wonderful. Because of that kind of playing and that kind of improvisation, Neil and I had this connection where, you work together day after day. It gets to the point where you don't even have to look at each other. We knew what the other guy was going to do. If Neil all of a sudden decided to take a left turn out into Spaceville or whatever, then I'd be there with him. And Neil and I both have this same need to try to come up with the most unique parts that we possibly can. And so Neil would be doing this, when we're writing a song, everybody wrote their own parts to every song. So Neil would be exploring every part of every song. We would try to see where we could take it. And then there would be a point where we would reel it in to serve the purpose of the song. So sometimes we'd go exploring out there and come up with something, and all of a sudden the song would take on this whole new part and direction because of the rhythm section. But usually what would happen is we would know that we were landing on what we thought was the best part because it would start coming together, the bass and drums. And once they would converge, it sounded like a locomotive coming through the room.
Exactly. And that's how a song like Halo Flies works, because you've got to have a drummer that can do parts like that. If it's just a steady 4/4 beat, you've got to have the more progressive stuff.
That's right. A rhythm section is one thing. It's a unit. You can't complement one without including the other.
Absolutely. And it's the core. I mean, really, when you talk about it, that's the core to every great band. You have to have a great rhythm section. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. If there's not a great drummer and bass player in a band, they're not going to be good. You could have amazing guitar players, but you've got to have that foundation.
That's right. If Neil and I wanted to prove that we were not underrated, all we have to do is stop playing in the middle of the song.
Right. Yeah. I always love, though, talking to bands, especially younger bands now who are in their 20s, about all of this, older stuff that they hear about from, whether it's their parents or whoever it was. I've found so many of these younger bands already know about the early Alice Cooper stuff and Rainbow and Deep Purple. They already know all this stuff, and they're all influenced by that. So it's like, I love seeing these, generation to generation to generation of musicians starting bands that go all the way back to the early stuff. Because I grew up in the 70s, so that's my favorite era of music, and I think kind of the best era of music. But I love that all these new generations are into it, and I can have a discussion with a guy in one of our bands who's like 27 years old about Halo Flies and how much he loves that song, which it's just amazing that the matter of time has gone on. It's still that way. I imagine when you're making this song, you didn't realize that you'd be talking about it all these years later.
No, absolutely not. Are you kidding? Back then, bands were putting out a couple albums every year because you were afraid that if you didn't have something on the radio, you would turn into last week's Flavor and that would be the end. And that happened to most bands. Majority of bands were gone overnight, But the other thing about Halo of Flies, we had our own language between us. So if somebody had like a guitar riff that was interesting that we thought, oh, that's cool, let's use that in a song, incorporate it some way. And if somebody had a rhythm part or a bass part or a drum part, we called it a germ, which was like something, I don't know how germ came about. It needs to be germinated or something, I don't know. But it was just a part that was worthy of a song, but it hadn't found its song yet. So going all the way back to when we were a cover band at the VIP in Phoenix, Arizona, we tried to come up with new songs for every weekend that we played at this club. And so we had so many songs that we decided we're going to do a Rolling Stones medley and a Kinks medley and a Who medley. And we got very good, I think, at putting songs together in a medley. So you'd start out with one song, and then when the guitar break came, all of a sudden it turned into a different Who song, right? So Halo of Flies, we took all of these germs that were kicking around and we made them into a medley. That's what the song is. It's a medley of germs.
That makes sense. So you're back with Alice again. Tell us about what's going on with all of that.
Well, yeah, who'd have thunk? I talk about not projecting into the future. Wow, who'd have ever thunk that all of these 52 years now, I think, it was the last time we recorded an official Alice Cooper album. You know, people are saying, wow, how did you guys come up with so many songs? Well, back in those days, we had to come up with an album worth of songs every 6 months. Now, give us 52 years. And we had tons of songs. I mean, we could have done 5 albums. Neil had 30, I had 30. Michael had at least 10, but his 10 was kind of equivalent to our 30 because he's the main AM songwriter. And then we had Bob Ezrin on board, which definitely helped because Glenn Buxton isn't around, even though he was totally there in spirit. So how did it come about? So a lot of steps. I mean, being inducted into the Rock Hall is definitely a factor. I wrote my book in 2015, so it's 10th anniversary now.
Which, by the way, is a phenomenal book. I read tons of autobiographies, and yours is one of the best. So kudos on that one. It's really well done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, snakes, guillotines, electric chairs. And I have a feeling that because of the tone of my book, taking the high road and just talking about the positive things that the band was about, that helped remind people of how much fun we had rather than everybody always, all these decades, asking about the breakup over and over. The breakup isn't what the band was about. The band was about the music, listen to the music. The theatrics were no-brainers for us. We put all of our time and energy and hours and all our waking hours pretty much into the music. And then we could come up with all kinds of ideas for stage. That was just having fun. So you think fast forward, here we are. Now I get a call. So also we had done this thing with my book in 2015 in Dallas at Good Records. This guy, Chris Penn, who unfortunately recently passed away, he asked me to do a book signing at his record store. And my publisher's like, hey, we've got all these book festivals and all kinds of Barnes and Noble and this and that. That's just a record store. But Chris was so persistent and said the right things and so positive. I said, we got to do this record store. And then Chris said, I've got a stage and people perform here. Would you like to get up and do some songs? I said, wait a minute, let's make this special. Let me see if I can get Neil and Michael. And as it turned out, Alice would be in town with a day off. So we ended up doing this surprise performance in this record store, and it turned into a movie. That these guys were filming it just for Chris, so he wouldn't be just pinching himself wondering if it really happened on Monday morning, But it turned out to be a movie and a record that Bob Ezrin mixed and everything. And so that was definitely a factor. Then we got together in Nashville and did another book event where the band sat in with Alice the night before at his show. And then the night after that, we did an intimate show at this famous hotel in Nashville to a room full of fans that got this whole completely different performance than the big show sitting in with Alice. This was more us just joking around on stage, which is what we do. So anyway, all these steps, and then Alice inviting us to record songs on his solo albums. But I think the final straw was Neil is a snowbird. He goes from Connecticut to Arizona. And he was out in Arizona and going over to Michael's studio, and they were kicking around songs and stuff. And then Alice was in town, and Alice joined them. And then soon after that, I get a call from Bob and Alice. Hey, Dennis, you want to do an album? And I'm like, hello, how about for 52 years now? Yeah. And that was all the way back in 2020. That's how long we've kept this thing a secret. It's been a long, tough road keeping my mouth shut. So then we said, okay, well, let's see what songs we have. And it started that way. So people, then, Neil sending me a few songs. Well, actually, we always have sent songs to each other, but we got a little bit more serious about what we thought might fit an Alice Cooper album. And to be honest, even without intending to do so, 90% of the songs I write are appropriate for Alice. I just write like that. And then there would be a long period where nothing would happen because Alice would be busy and Bob would be in the studio with somebody else and all that. And then all of a sudden, I get another call and things would be moving again. So the first major thing is we finally decided, well, let's get just the band together without Bob Ezrin. Just an engineer out in Phoenix, Arizona at the Solid Rock Teen Center, which is the facility that Alice and his wife, Cheryl, are a big part of. And let's just go in the studio and see if we can get it back. Well, there was no getting it back. We walked in the studio and it's the same as it's always been. A lot of joking around, but also a lot of focused on everybody knows exactly what we need to do to make a good song. And we came up with about 4 of the songs pretty much on the spot while we were out there. I think Wild Ones, Black Mamba, Intergalactic Vagabond Blues, and maybe a couple others. We just laid down demos of us doing those songs. Black Mamba actually just started with a jam riff that Michael had, and then Alice came up with the melody and later on nailed the lyrics down. So we did that, and then Bob Ezrin heard, oh, okay, well, the guys are definitely still comfortable in the studio. Well, hello, we've been recording all these years. It's like, people would say, oh, wow, Dennis Dunaway, I didn't know you were still playing. Well, I've never stopped, hello. Same with Neil. It's just because with the name goes the notoriety, and all of a sudden, because I'm not putting out a record that has Alice Cooper as the draw, then that seems to just slip by the wayside. But so the next step is I kept trying to get Bob Ezrin and Alice and Neil and Michael to say which 10 songs am I to focus on here, because I don't want to have to learn, 70 songs and I could not get an answer. And if I did, it would always be different. It kept evolving. Oh, wait a minute, I like this one. Oh, we got to have this one. Oh, don't forget that one. And so then Bob Ezrin booked studio time at Carriage House Studios in Stamford, Connecticut. And so I thought, and I don't think I'm the only one that thought this, we were going to just go in the studio and do pre-production and decide what 10 songs we were going to do and polish them. No, we walked in and we started recording, learning what song do you want to learn next? Hey, how about this one? Okay, how does it go? And I wouldn't want anybody to think that means that this record isn't as thought out as Love It to Death or Killer because we didn't have the pre-production. No, this was overcompensated for in the feel is so live and energetic. It's like that, I think it was a Confucius says kind of thing. Confucius says, when you create something creatively, an artist or a musician, when you create something, and it's wonderful. You have to rehearse it 1,000 times more to get it back to that point, right? So that initial spontaneity, that energy, that excitement that you've got this new song, that's what's captured on this album. And the energy is definitely live feeling. It's got this raw energy that's driving. So because of that, I'm very proud of this album.
Awesome.
It's
awesome.
live.
Well, I'm so happy you're back with Alice again after all these years making music. That makes me very happy. And thank you so much for doing this. Much appreciated. Thank you again.
Okay, Brian.
A middle-aged lady, she really came as no surprise, but I still did destroy her, and I will smash Halo.
There you have it. That was a fun episode. Really, really great talking to Dennis Dunaway. I've been a huge fan of his for a long time. As I mentioned, a fan of his book, which is incredible. Really the definitive book on the original Alice Cooper band. Highly recommended. I met him a couple times in New York briefly, but it was really nice to speak to him and get his insights on this amazing song. Jay Ruston, of course, Martin Popoff. Thanks, as always, to Lizzie Borden for our theme song, and the man who keeps the ship afloat, producer Christian Blatt. We'll see you guys next episode.
100